The morning light filtered through my kitchen window as I measured out coffee grounds with the same precision I'd used for the past 47 years. One scoop, then another, each movement deliberate and careful. At 72, I'd learned that small rituals keep you grounded when everything else feels uncertain. My name is Eleanor. And I suppose most people would look at my life and see an ordinary widow living in a modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street. They'd see someone who clips coupons, tends a small garden, and drives a 12-year-old Honda with a dent in the passenger door from that unfortunate encounter with Mrs. Peterson's garbage bin. What they wouldn't see is that I'm far from helpless. And I'm certainly not naive. The house felt larger since Harold passed 3 years ago. It's not physically, it's still the same 1,200 square feet we bought when Michael was born, but emotionally vast in a way that sometimes took my breath away. I'd kept everything mostly the same. Harold's reading chair still angled toward the television. His coffee mug still hanging on the third hook by the sink. Some mornings I'd catch myself setting to places at the breakfast table before remembering. But I'd found my rhythm in widowhood. It's Tuesday mornings at the community center for water aerobics, where Martha, Chen, and I would gossip about our neighbors while pretending to exercise. Thursday afternoons volunteering at the food bank, sorting donations, and chatting with anyone who needed an ear. Weekends were for my garden, where tomatoes and roses grew with equal stubbornness under my careful attention. My son Michael would call every few weeks, usually on Sunday evenings when the rates used to be cheaper, a habit that persisted long after cell phone plans made such considerations obsolete. These conversations followed a predictable pattern. He'd ask about my health, mention something about work at the accounting firm, and then hand the phone to his wife Jessica so she could deliver an update about their lives in that artificially bright voice she reserved for people she tolerated rather than loved. Jessica had never warmed to me, not in the 8 years since she and Michael married. She was 34 to his 39, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a wardrobe that suggested money spent on appearances rather than substance. She worked in marketing for some tech company, a job that seemed to involve a lot of conferences in expensive cities and very little time at home. When they visited, which wasn't often, she'd perch on the edge of my sofa like she might catch something, her manicured fingers constantly checking her phone. "Mom's doing fine," Michael would tell her, as if I weren't sitting right there. Same as always. Same as always. The phrase stung more than it should have, carrying the implication that my life was static, unchanging, perhaps even boring, as if stability was something to be pitied rather than admired. The first hint of trouble came on a Wednesday in October. I was repotting some geraniums on the back porch when my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, unusual for a weekday afternoon. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. No greeting, no asking after my health. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager asking to borrow the car for some ill-advised adventure. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind? We're coming over this evening. Jessica and I have something important to discuss with you." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, dirt still under my fingernails from the geraniums, feeling the first flutter of unease in my chest. In all his 39 years, Michael had never announced visits like that as proclamations rather than requests. They arrived at 7:30 sharp. Jessica clicking up my front walkway in heels that seemed designed more for show than for the uneven brick path Harold had laid by hand 20 years ago. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. Her smile as polished as her appearance. "Eleanor," she said, leaning in for one of those air kisses that never quite makes contact. "You look... well." Oh, the pause before well spoke volumes. I caught my reflection in the hall mirror as we walked to the living room. Gray hair, pulled back in a simple bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck, cardigan that had seen better years but still had good wear in it. I looked exactly like what I was, a 72-year-old woman who prioritized comfort over fashion. Michael seemed nervous, running his hands through hair that was thinning more each time I saw him. He'd inherited Harold's build, tall and lean, but where Harold had carried himself with quiet confidence, Michael hunched slightly, as if apologizing for taking up space. "Can I get you both some coffee?" I asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Actually, Mom, let's just sit and talk," Michael said. "This is ... Well, it's important." We arranged ourselves in my living room, Jessica and Michael on the sofa, me in Harold's chair. Its furniture suddenly felt formal, like we were strangers meeting for the first time, rather than family gathering in the room where Michael had once built blanket forts and later studied for his SATs. "Mom," Michael began, then stopped, glancing at Jessica. She gave him an encouraging nod, the kind of gesture that suggested they'd rehearsed this conversation. "We're in a bit of a situation." "What kind of situation?" Jessica leaned forward, her expression shifting into what I recognized as her professional mode. The face she probably wore in marketing meetings when she needed to sell something. "Eleanor, we know you've been living modestly since Harold passed, and we admire that. Really, we do. But the thing is, Michael and I have an opportunity that could change our lives." "An opportunity?" "A business investment," Michael said quickly. "My friend Dave, you remember Dave from college, he's got this amazing deal. Real estate development in Austin. The market there is just exploding. And if we get in now, we could triple our money in 2 years." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "That sounds ... promising." "It is," Jessica said, her voice gaining energy. "The thing is, we need to move fast. These kinds of opportunities don't wait around, and we need $100,000 to secure our position." There it was, the ask. It's the reason for the unexpected visit, the rehearsed presentation, the professional smiles. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not surprise exactly, but disappointment. Deep, aching disappointment. $100,000, I repeated. "I know it sounds like a lot," Michael said, leaning forward earnestly. "But Mom, this could set us up for life. Kay and I have been struggling more than we've let on. Kay fell, the house payment, her student loans, my credit cards. We're barely keeping our heads above water." This was news to me. Their house in Westfield was easily worth $400,000, and they drove matching BMWs that couldn't be more than 3 years old. But people's financial situations could be deceiving. I knew that. Appearances often masked deep debt. "And you think I have that kind of money?" I asked gently. Jessica's laugh had a sharp edge to it. "Come on, Eleanor. And the house is paid off, right? You could take out a home equity loan. It's not like you're going to need the money for anything major. At my age." The phrase hung in the air like smoke, stinging my eyes and making it hard to breathe. At my age, as if my remaining years were already discounted, already written off as unimportant. "Sia?" said carefully. "Mom, please," Michael said. And for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. This could be our only shot at real financial security. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become someone who would sit in his childhood home and ask his elderly mother to risk her financial security for his get-rich-quick scheme? When had he married someone who would calculate the value of my remaining years like an actuarial table? "I need to think about it," I said finally. Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Cuss. But like I said, time is a factor here. We need to know by Friday. 3 days. They were giving me 3 days to decide whether to hand over what they assumed was a significant portion of my life savings. After they left, I sat in Harold's chair for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The refrigerator hummed. In the kitchen, the old radiator in the hallway clicked and sighed. Normal sounds that suddenly felt precious, like a life I might be foolish to risk. The truth was, I did have the money. Harold had been more successful than we'd ever let on, building his small construction business into something substantial before selling it 5 years before his death. The life insurance Jessica mentioned was real, but it was only part of a financial picture that included investments, savings, and yes, the paid-off house. We'd lived modestly because that's who we were, not because we had to. But we'd also been careful, planning for exactly this kind of situation. The possibility that I might live another 20 years, that I might need care, that medical expenses, or home repairs, or simple inflation might eat away at what seemed like security today. Harold had drilled it into me. Never touch the principal unless it's life or death. Over the next 2 days, I found myself studying Michael's request from every angle. Called my financial advisor, a patient woman named Ruth who had been helping Harold and me for 15 years. Without mentioning specifics, I asked about real estate investments, about liquidity, about the wisdom of large financial gifts to adult children. Eleanor, Ruth said carefully, I can't tell you what to do with your money. I can tell you that any investment requiring immediate action and large sums should be approached with extreme caution.
Okay.
And at your stage of life, preserving capital is usually more important than growing it. I also did my own research, spending hours at the library computer learning about Austin real estate, about investment scams, about the warning signs of financial elder abuse. The more I read, the more uncomfortable I became with Michael and Jessica's timeline, their pressure tactics, their assumption that I would simply comply. On Thursday evening, I called Michael. I've made my decision, I said when he answered. Great. I knew you'd come through for us, Mom. Jessica's already talked to Dave, and I'm saying no, Michael. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Jessica's voice came through the speaker. Apparently, I was on speakerphone. What do you mean? No? I mean, I'm not comfortable risking that much money on an investment I know nothing about, with people I've never met, on a timeline that doesn't allow for proper research. Mom, Michael's voice was tight now, controlled in a way that suggested he was working hard not to yell. This is our future we're talking about. Our only chance to get ahead. Kay, and this is my security we're talking about, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. My ability to maintain my independence for whatever years I have left. Jesus, Mom, you're 72, not 92, Jessica snapped, her professional mask finally slipping. How much independence do you really need? It's not like you're traveling the world or buying sports cars. Cruelty of it took my breath away. It's not just the dismissal of my remaining years, but the suggestion that because I lived quietly, my life had less value. That because I found joy in small things, my garden, my volunteering, my modest routines, somehow deserved less consideration. I'm sorry, I said quietly. My answer is no. Michael hung up without another word. I spent Friday in a strange state of suspended animation, waiting for something, another call, an apology, some acknowledgement that the conversation had gone too far. Instead, I got silence, a kind of silence that feels like punishment, like emotional withdrawal designed to change your mind. Saturday morning brought a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jessica standing on my porch, alone this time, holding a small paper bag and wearing what might have been her most sincere smile. Oh, Eleanor, she said warmly, I owe you an apology. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse. Her makeup was perfect as always, but there were tight lines around her eyes that suggested stress or sleepless nights. "May I come in?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Jessica walked into my kitchen like she belonged there, setting the paper bag on my counter with the casual confidence of someone who was used to getting what she wanted. "I brought you something special," she said, reaching into the bag. "That coffee you love, the Colombian blend from Morrison's? I picked up a bag yesterday, and I thought we could sit and talk like civilized people." It was a local coffee shop that had closed 6 months ago, but I didn't correct her. Instead, I watched as she opened the bag and pulled out a container of ground coffee I didn't recognize. The smell was off, somehow too sweet, with an underlying chemical note that made my nose wrinkle. "Jessica, I appreciate the gesture, but please," she said, her hand on my arm. "Let me make you a cup. It's the least I can do after Thursday night, I said some things I shouldn't have." There was something in her tone, an insistence that felt less like hospitality and more like desperation. But I was curious too, wondering what game she was playing now. "All right," I said. "You know where everything is?" I sat at my kitchen table and watched her work. Jessica moved around my kitchen with surprising efficiency, filling the coffee pot, measuring grounds with the same precision I used every morning. But her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept glancing at me as if checking to make sure I was still there. "Michael doesn't know I'm here," she said as the coffee began to brew. He's pretty upset about your decision." "Oh, I understand. I really do. It's a lot of money, and we probably came on too strong." "Probably." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Okay, definitely. The thing is, Eleanor, we really are in trouble. The investment opportunity is real, but even without it, we're looking at some serious financial problems. Michael's been too proud to tell you the whole truth." The coffee maker gurgled and hissed, filling the kitchen with that strange, too sweet smell. Jessica poured 2 mugs, adding cream and sugar to mine without asking how I liked it. Another small sign that, despite her familiar presence in my kitchen, she didn't really know me at all. "What kind of problems?" I asked, accepting the mug she offered. "Credit card debt, mainly. And the house payment is killing us. Michael's been borrowing against his 401k to keep up with everything." She sat across from me, wrapping her hands around her own mug like she needed the warmth. "I keep telling him we should downsize, but you know how men are about admitting failure." I lifted the mug to my lips, then paused. The smell was even stronger up close, almost medicinal. "This coffee tastes different. It's a special blend," Jessica said quickly. "Colombian with some added nutrients. Ginseng, I think. Supposed to be good for people our age." People our age. She was 34 to my 72, but apparently we were in the same demographic now when it came to needing nutritional supplements. I set the mug down without drinking. "Jessica, what do you really want?" Her composure cracked just slightly, a flash of something desperate crossing her features before she recovered. "I want us to be family, Eleanor. Real family. And I want you to trust that Michael and I would never do anything to hurt you." "Then why does this feel like manipulation?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, then let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "You're sharper than we gave you credit for," she said, and there was something different in her voice now. Harder. "Michael keeps saying you're just a sweet old lady who doesn't understand modern life. But you're not, are you?" I kept my expression neutral, even as my heart rate picked up. "I'm exactly who I've always been. Are you?" Jessica leaned forward, her professional mask slipping further. Because the sweet old lady I thought I knew wouldn't have done a credit check on Michael's friend. Dave wouldn't have called Austin real estate offices asking about investment opportunities. Wouldn't have contacted a lawyer about financial abuse. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I hadn't done any of those things. But Jessica's assumption that I had revealed more about her mindset than she probably intended. "Drink your coffee, Eleanor," she said softly. "It'll help you relax." I looked down at the mug in my hands, understanding flooding through me like cold water. The strange smell, the insistence that I drink it. The way she'd shown up alone, with a story about making amends. "What's in the coffee, Jessica?" Her smile was different now, lacking any pretense of warmth. "It's nothing that will hurt you permanently. It's just something to help you see reason, to make you more agreeable to signing some paperwork." I set the mug on the table with hands that were steadier than I felt. "You're talking about drugging me." "I'm talking about helping an elderly woman make a decision that's in everyone's best interests," Jessica said calmly. "You're going to give us that money, Eleanor, one way or another. Michael deserves his inheritance now, when it can actually help him, not after you're dead and buried." The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that my remaining years were just an inconvenient delay before my son could claim what he saw as rightfully his, hit me like a physical blow. But underneath the hurt was something else. Clarity. I wasn't dealing with desperate family members making poor choices. I was dealing with people who had already written me off as an obstacle to their plans. "Does Michael know about this?" I asked, nodding toward the coffee mug. "Michael knows we need that money," Jessica said. "He doesn't need to know the details of how we get it." I stood up slowly, using the table for support, not because I needed it physically, but because I wanted Jessica to see an old woman struggling with the weight of her betrayal. "I think you should leave. Not until you drink that coffee," Jessica said, standing as well. She was taller than me, younger, stronger, and her voice carried a threat that made my skin crawl. "Come on, Eleanor. Don't make this harder than it has to be." What happened next surprised us both. Instead of cowering or pleading, I started to laugh. It's not hysterical laughter, but the genuine amusement of someone who had just realized they were playing a game where they held all the cards. "What's so funny?" Jessica demanded. "You," I said, wiping my eyes. "You're so busy treating me like a helpless old fool that you never considered I might be 3 steps ahead of you." I walked to my kitchen counter and opened the drawer where I kept my dish towels. Underneath them was something Jessica couldn't see, a small digital recorder. I'd placed there yesterday morning when Michael called to arrange this visit. I'd learned a few things about protecting yourself in my 72 years, and one of them was that when people showed you who they really were, you should gather evidence. "I've been recording this conversation," I said pleasantly. "Every word. From your confession about drugging me to your lovely comments about Michael's inheritance." Jessica's face went white. "You can't. That's not legal. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation." "I consent." I pulled the recorder from the drawer, its red light blinking steadily. "And I think the police will be very interested in what you put in my coffee. It's attempted drugging of an elderly person is a felony, isn't it?" For a moment, Jessica just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then her expression hardened into something ugly and desperate. "You think you're so smart," she hissed. "But who's going to believe you? A confused old woman with a grudge against her daughter-in-law. Michael will never forgive you for this. Michael is about to learn some hard truths about the woman he married," I said calmly. "The question is whether he chooses to be part of your schemes or part of the solution." Jessica grabbed her purse from the counter, her composure completely shattered now. "This isn't over, Eleanor. You can't live in that house forever. You're going to need help eventually. And when you do, don't expect it to come from family." "Don't worry about me," I said. "I've been taking care of myself longer than you've been alive." After she left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the coffee mug with its sinister contents. Part of me wanted to call the police immediately, to have Jessica arrested and charged. But a larger part of me knew that criminal charges would destroy Michael too, and despite everything, he was still my son. Instead, I called my lawyer. Margaret Santos had been Harold's lawyer first, then ours, and finally mine. She was 60-something herself, with silver hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that came from decades of dealing with people at their worst. "Eleanor," she said when I explained the situation, "you need to come to my office immediately. Bring that recording and the coffee. We need to have both analyzed and documented before you decide what to do next." 2 hours later, I sat in Margaret's office while she listened to the recording twice, making notes on a legal pad. Coffee mug sat on her desk like evidence in a criminal trial, which I supposed it was. "This is attempted poisoning at worst, assault at best," Margaret said finally, "with clear evidence of financial elder abuse and conspiracy. You could press charges and put both of them in prison. I don't want to destroy Michael's life. Michael made his choices when he married this woman and went along with her schemes," Margaret said gently. "But I understand your reluctance. Let me ask you something. What do you want to happen here?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching the afternoon sun slant through Margaret's office windows. What did I want? Justice, certainly. Protection, absolutely. But also something else's way to save my son from his own poor judgment. If that was still possible. "I want them to leave me alone," I said finally. "I want assurance that they'll never try something like this again. And I want Michael to understand exactly who he's married to." Margaret nodded slowly. "I think we can arrange that." The meeting took place in Margaret's conference room the following Tuesday. Michael arrived alone, looking haggard and confused. He'd been expecting a family discussion about the inheritance, not a formal legal meeting. "Mom, what's this about?" he asked as Margaret set a recording device on the table. "Listen," I said simply. I pressed play. Michael's face changed as he heard his wife's voice admitting to attempted drugging, discussing his inheritance like I was already dead, dismissing my remaining years as inconvenient obstacles to their financial plans. At the time the recording ended, he looked like he'd been physically struck. "She didn't count. He began, then stopped. "Mom, I swear I didn't know about any of this." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. Michael was weak, financially irresponsible, and guilty of seeing me as a resource rather than a person. But he wasn't evil. Jessica, however, was another story entirely. "Where is Jessica now?" Margaret asked. "At home, I guess. She said she was sick." Michael's voice was hollow. "Mom, what she tried to do to you, The question now," Margaret said, "is what happens next. Your mother has clear grounds for criminal charges against Jessica. Attempted poisoning, conspiracy, financial elder abuse. She could go to prison for 10 years. Michael looked at me with desperate eyes. "Mom, please. I know what she did was wrong. It was insane. But if you press charges, it'll destroy everything. My job, our house, our whole life. Your life with a woman who tried to drug your mother so she could steal her money?" I asked gently. "I'll leave her," Michael said quickly. "I'll file for divorce tomorrow. But please, don't have her arrested. I'm begging you." I looked at my son, really looked at him. At 39, he still had the capacity to change, to learn from this horrible mistake, to become the man I'd raised him to be. But that would only happen if the consequences were severe enough to wake him up. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to go home and tell Jessica that she has 24 hours to leave the state. If she ever contacts me again, if she ever comes near me again, if she ever tries to manipulate or threaten me in any way, I will release this recording to the police and press full charges. Mom, I'm not finished. You're going to divorce Jessica. And you're going to get counseling to figure out how you became someone who would ask your elderly mother to risk her security for your get-rich-quick schemes. And you're going to stay away from me until you can honestly say you see me as a person, not a bank account." Michael's face crumpled. "How long?" "That's up to you," I said. "When you're ready to have a relationship based on love instead of money, we'll talk." As it turned out, I never saw Jessica again. According to Michael, she left the next day, driving off in her BMW with whatever she could fit in the back seat. Filed for divorce 2 weeks later from somewhere in California, demanding half of everything despite their prenup. Michael fought it, with Margaret's help. And the real revelation came 3 months later, when Michael appeared at my door on a Sunday afternoon. He looked different, thinner, older, but somehow more substantial. Like he'd been carrying a weight he'd finally set down. "I brought something for you," he said, holding out a thick manila envelope. Inside were bank statements, credit reports, and financial documents I didn't understand at first. Then I saw what he was showing me. Jessica hadn't just been planning to drug me for $100,000. She'd been systematically emptying their joint accounts, maxing out credit cards in Michael's name, and applying for loans using forged documents. The desperate financial situation she'd described was real, but it was entirely of her making. "She was planning to leave me anyway," Michael said quietly. "The money from you was supposed to be her escape fund. I would have been left with all the debt and no way to pay it." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be sorry for me. Be sorry that it took something this extreme for me to see who she really was, to see how I'd been treating you." He looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the boy he'd been before. Life had hardened him. "Been in counseling, like you suggested. And I've been thinking about a lot of things. Kind of things. Like how I turned into someone who would ask his mother to risk her security for my problems. Like how I married someone who saw you as an obstacle instead of a person. Like how I've been taking for granted that you'd always be there. Always. Be willing to bail me out. Always put my needs ahead of your own." I reached across my kitchen table and took his hand. "You're my son, Michael. I've loved you since before you were born, and I'll love you until the day I die. But love doesn't mean enabling bad choices or sacrificing my own well-being for your convenience. I know that now," he said. "'Kay, and I want to earn back the right to be part of your life." "'Kay? Really part of it? Not just someone who calls when he needs something?" It wasn't magic. Rebuilding our relationship took time, patience, and more difficult conversations than I care to count. But Michael was true to his word. He got counseling, found a better job, and slowly paid down the debts Jessica had left him with. More importantly, he started visiting not because he wanted something, but because he genuinely wanted to spend time with me. We never talked about money again. I never told him the full extent of what Harold and I had saved, and he never asked. Instead, we talked about books, about his work, about my garden and my volunteering. We built a relationship based on who we were as people, not on what we could do for each other. Jessica never contacted me again, though I heard through Michael that she'd remarried within a year, a widower in his 70s with substantial assets. I hoped he was savvier than she gave him credit for. As for me, I kept living my quiet life on Maple Street. I still tended my garden, still volunteered at the food bank, still measured my coffee with the same precision every morning. But something had changed in those few terrible days. I'd discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. And I'd learned that being underestimated could actually be an advantage. I also made some changes to my estate planning. With Margaret's help, Michael would inherit everything eventually, but under terms that protected both of us. And the first set aside money for causes I cared about: the food bank, the community center, a scholarship fund for students who, like I once had, needed help seeing their potential. The house feels smaller now than it did in those first months after Harold's death. Not because I've acquired more things, but because I've filled it with a different kind of presence. Friends stop by more often. Michael visits every Sunday for dinner. I've even started hosting a weekly card game for the women from my water aerobics class. The other day, Martha Chen asked me what had changed. "You seem different," she said as we sat on my back porch, watching the roses bloom. More ... I don't know. More yourself. I thought about her question for a long time. Had changed. I was still the same person I'd always been, still careful with money, still proud of my independence, still devoted to my son despite his flaws. But I was also someone who had faced down a real threat and emerged stronger. I think I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I told Martha, finally. For having opinions, for protecting myself, for expecting to be treated with respect. She nodded knowingly. About time. About time, indeed. It had taken me 72 years to fully understand that being kind didn't mean being weak. That being generous didn't mean being foolish, okay? And that loving someone didn't require sacrificing your own well-being. I still live quietly, still find joy in small things, still prefer comfort over fashion. But now I do these things by choice, not because anyone expects them of me. And when someone tries to treat me like a helpless old fool, I remember the look on Jessica's face when she realized she'd underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. The recording device still lives in my kitchen drawer, though I've never needed to use it again. It's a reminder that sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to let people reveal their true intentions while you quietly gather evidence. And that the element of surprise belongs to whoever people underestimate. Most doubt now that you've heard my story, I wonder, has anyone ever made you feel like your worth depended on your wallet? Have you ever watched someone you love try to twist your trust into their personal gain? Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story of quiet strength reaches. Getting older isn't about giving up. It's about knowing exactly when to stand tall and how to protect what truly matters.